everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bone Club. It is I, Ashley, and I'm here with Stephanie and Jenna. And we have a very special guest, one of my really good friends, Skylar Joseph, all the way from the University of Linden in the Netherlands. But the reason why she's here is because before she went to the Netherlands, she worked for a very noble organization, one that I've wanted to work for, one that I have long respected, the International Committee for the Red Cross. And she's here to talk to us today about human rights, humanitarian disasters and issues, and what the ICRC and what the role of forensic anthropologists play in those broader concepts. So welcome, Skylar. Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you,
want to
Ashley. I'm happy
briefly
to be
introduce
here.
yourself and stuff?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Skylar, and I'm currently 1 year into my PhD at Leiden University. So my current project is focusing on the missing and deceased migration crisis in the Mediterranean, and specifically looking at how a lack of state accountability and certain state policies affect the people who are doing casework. So that I want to interview humanitarian workers, forensic practitioners, and different types of migrant networks who do both formal and informal casework, looking for those who go missing and die at sea. And this project is actually highly influenced by like some of the work I was doing at ICRC. So at ICRC, I worked in the forensic unit at headquarters in Geneva, and I started in an associate role, which is like the most entry level position you can have. And I worked on a lot of different projects while I was there. I really enjoyed my work. I got to engage with a lot of people working in the field in our different delegations. And so, yeah, like my current project is influenced from some of the work I did there, but I didn't work too much directly with migration, but I more learned about kind of the different ways that medical legal systems are failing in general around the world, but also specifically in relation to migration cases because of the different ways that migrants can fall through the cracks of the different legal systems, and how states don't want to take accountability for searching for these people. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm also a forensic anthropologist, to clarify that. And I work on archaeological dig in Egypt as well.
I guess my first question is, what made you, like, I feel like, as anthropologists, a lot of us obviously care really deeply about human rights and view culture as such a broad, like, speaking concept that, like, I think we think about cultures very differently than probably most other people that, like, don't have a background in anthropology. But, like, what made you go towards humanitarian aid, human rights work, instead of other, like, medical legal, like, more traditional, I guess, quote unquote, forensic anthropology?
Yeah, I mean, I originally wanted to pursue forensic anthropology because I really loved human skeletons, like from a very young age. My mom told me this story from when I was about 3, and we had a medical encyclopedia with like the pages with like the bones and the stuff. And apparently I would just sit there and ask my mom like what the names of all the bones were, because I couldn't read yet. So she would read the little labels. But like, so I pursued my desire to like learn more about the human skeleton because I found it really interesting from a young age. But then actually when I was in grad school, so I went to the same grad school as Ashley, Boston University. And while I was there and I had finally achieved like starting my master's, I then started thinking, what do I actually want to do with, like, once I get my degree, what do I want to do next? Because I hadn't thought that far clearly yet. It's like, I want to be a forensic anthropologist, but I hadn't thought about what that would mean. Because in the context of like human rights and stuff, I see the different ways that the legal system, the medical legal system can be very corrupt. And coming from the US, there's a lot of different situations where people are unjustly prosecuted. And so it made me really like question what my personal role would be comfortable with in terms of interacting with this system, because it's like I wouldn't want to essentially have the weight of a wrongful conviction like on my conscience, or knowing I contributed, even if like even if it wasn't like my testimony that like caused that to happen, I would still feel responsible in some way.
Even if tangentially,
Exactly.
tangentially
Yeah.
don't want it.
And so then I actually went to my first AFS conference, my first year of grad school, I think, and they had a whole panel on humanitarian work and mostly ICRC people. And I was just like, this is what I want to do. And humanitarian work also differs from human rights work in that, like, I also have an interest in human rights, forensics in human rights. But for human rights, you're still on that prosecutorial end, because you are the one that are looking into like genocide and war crimes and like, executions and torture. And so you're on the prosecutorial side of that, whereas the humanitarian side is almost strictly for like identification purposes or like capacity building. And so it's a very different role where you're supporting the main forensic professionals in that country to make sure they're applying the proper methods and techniques. But you're not interfering with their casework if they are trying to do either domestic or human rights type of casework. And they're strictly neutral and help with identifications and repatriation. So they talk between states, which is why they can't be involved in the prosecutorial side of things. Yeah, did I answer that question fully? Sometimes I ramble.
That actually leads me to a question I have, though, because you separated humanitarian and human rights. But what we see today, one of the things that we notice if anybody watches the news, is there seems to be a rise in conflict. I mean, last week we had the hot war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. There's still the hot conflict between Israel and Gaza. There's the hot conflict between Russia and Ukraine, even though it just earlier or late last week settled. You had the peace accord between, or peace deal, ceasefire between the Republic of Congo and Rwanda. So you have conflicts all over the world. What is the role between the ICRC and those conflicts and human rights work? Does the ICRC just work out and done and come in after the fact? Do they act kind of as referees, or are they in there in the middle, making sure that civilians are protected, trying to ensure that rights of civilians and that humanitarian aid can get in during those conflicts? What is that role of the ICRC during those conflicts and during the human rights atrocities that take place during those conflicts?
Yeah, so the ICRC is a very unique and independent organization. So it's different than the UN, and it's different than like any other type of NGOs, even international NGOs. And the ICRC specifically focuses on international humanitarian law, which guides the laws of war, essentially. And so the forensic unit in ICRC is one small part, but ICRC on a more broad scale does a lot of things related to conflict and post-conflict. So we have international humanitarian lawyers who do a variety of roles, often with negotiating between state parties or between armed groups. They often negotiate humanitarian aid getting in and how that is distributed. They offer services related to like education and water and rehabilitation, and economic security. They do things relating to protecting children and protecting vulnerable populations, prisoners of war. Yeah, they do a lot. And then the forensic unit specifically, we most closely work with the Restoring Family Links unit and the protection data unit. And together they form the central tracing agency with the forensic unit. And that's focused on missing persons, essentially. So connecting missing persons and those who die in different situations, particularly relating to conflict and post-conflict situations. So in addition to that, the forensic unit also focuses on like on the ground capacity building. They do lots and lots of trainings. I would say that's probably one of the biggest things. And then they also will go in and support with like body recovery and identification for like strictly identification purposes. So like if you're excavating a mass grave specifically for human rights purposes, different agencies will go in. So, or they'll go in with ICRC, and it's like as long as the person from ICRC essentially doesn't touch any evidence or something where like they are the person who would need to testify about that, they can go in and support just because they are not allowed to testify in these types of cases. Like they can't be the one doing the analysis or things like that. And so like a good example of this is recently in Gaza, where all of the ambulances that had been attacked and the crew that had been attacked were buried. And so the bodies and the vehicles were all buried. And so ICRC was there. They had one person there, as far as I know, but then you had people from the UN and other organizations that were doing the actual like recovery and casework, because ICRC would be there to also like document like the war crimes. But ICRC is not going to be the one prosecuting that. They keep all of their information to themselves because they need it to be able to do their jobs better and negotiating, but they have to stay neutral. Neutrality is essential to ICRC's work. Whereas like other agencies don't necessarily have to be neutral. And so they can and do need to take a side when they're investigating these things.
How do you maintain that neutrality? That's for me, that's a big one, because as human beings, we're naturally not neutral. We like to take sides. Particularly when we see suffering, we like to take sides. So how does one maintain that neutrality, even in suffering?
Yeah, so I mean, ICRC from an organizational standpoint, they need to maintain neutrality to maintain access. And that goes for other organizations as well, but they other organizations have less strict stances on neutrality. So like MSF is, or Doctors Without Borders is another one that works in many of the same contexts as ICRC, but they will denounce conflicts much sooner. ICRC almost never denounces a state unless there is literally no possibility for them to do their work because things have gotten so bad. And so everybody often will point out how ICRC knew about the concentration camps in Germany during World War II, long before that information became more publicly known. And everybody gets mad because it's like, why weren't you doing anything? And it's because they were doing stuff, just nobody knows what ICRC does because they can't tell people.
Mhm.
And so like, because they were still getting in and able to help some people, like those were the benefits that they were counting on. Whereas if they denounced them and, you know, leaked all of their confidential information to the greater public, while that has more of a prosecutorial route, the direct and immediate need for whatever the vulnerable population is there, they won't get that aid anymore. And so it's hard. Neutrality is hard. And yeah, it's a trade-off. It depends on what your goals are.
But I'm thinking more of as the individual, as the practitioner.
Yeah, I mean, on an individual
would there
level,
be, is there, not to force the curtain back too much, is there amount of turnover because of burnout
oh, yeah.
dealing with this? Because it's seeing these things and just I can't be neutral much longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think often, yeah, I mean, it really comes down to that like personal conscience and like whether you know the work you are doing is more important than like your own personal stances. Because everybody I know who works at ICRC has to be able to talk to both sides. That's the purpose of ICRC. And so by holding your own personal views back, you're able to do that work and help more people. And so it's kind of like, yeah, it's like everybody still has their own opinions. And there is a lot of burnout. There's a lot of burnout. Just as a flat statement, there's a lot of burnout. Like one of my friends he's not a forensic person, but he has a different role at ICRC, but he is currently in Haiti. And like he's really been struggling with the pressure and the stress and like feeling a bit lost, I think, in terms of how much help they're actually able to provide. Because like really complicated contexts also make things more challenging. Yeah, yeah. And then like for like the forensic unit, it's actually, for me personally, it was the healthiest work environment I have ever been in.
Oh wow.
My supervisor was amazing. I like Pierre is amazing. Pierre is still the head of unit. He is the best supervisor I've ever had. And I worked closely with Stephen Fonseca who's based in South Africa. And he's also amazing. Like there are so many really amazing people at ICRC who I had the chance to work with. But because of the types of like work everyone is doing and the pressure of the organization as a whole, everybody is overworked. There are not enough staff because they don't get enough funding. The organization in general doesn't get enough funding, but then the forensic unit gets such a small amount of funding that like there's some context where like there are certain places in Africa where like one person is supposed to cover like 6 countries. And so it's very limited what types of services they can provide and what types of help they can do because one person is stretched like so thin. And then at headquarters, like there's a lot of infighting and like territorialness like within the organization. And so it's stressful in a different way. So yeah, everybody goes through burnout. They actually plan it essentially in the way that they structure their like leave and stuff because they assume that everyone's going to go and get burnt out, and so they give you like 6 months or a year of like, you know, potential burnout pay if you get like medically diagnosed as burnt out. Which is good, but like everybody goes through like burnout, like, and then they'll recover and then they'll like work again until they burn out. Yeah.
No, I
So
mean,
in previous weeks, we talked about, sorry,
no, go ahead.
in previous weeks, we talked about vicarious trauma and how some institutions are slow to catch up with kind of caring for their people in that way. Do you find, is the 6 months, is that how they're trying to help you guys deal with it? Or are there other things in place to help you to manage that vicarious trauma?
Yeah, honestly, they don't do nearly enough. Like I think they do kind of try to compensate by just allowing people to take time off when they get burnt out, which is good because I mean a lot of jobs don't do that. But like it's not enough, and like the psychological support is not enough, and most people when they come back from missions they're supposed to have like a debrief and actually talk about what happened and stuff, and like that very rarely happens or happens properly. Like they'll just get sent, because also between different, typically how most mobile ICRC contracts work is like you have a contract for like a year and a half, and then you can choose whether or not you want to extend it for another year and a half, and then you have to move on to a new context. And so like in between those missions, you often have a slightly longer break than normal, like R&R periods where they allow you, like they help send you back home. And like if you're in a very intense context, you get more R&R periods. But like rest is not necessarily enough. And it's like they try to say that mental health isn't stigmatized, but it is. Like it very much is, because if you have certain diagnoses in your medical file, you can't necessarily get posted in a field position because they don't know that you're not going to like have a breakdown or do something that like could threaten the organization. And so it's like everybody's stigmatized against going to get help if they're struggling. And so we did get a free subscription to Headspace, I think. Yeah. So there's that also on top of the like R&R, but yeah, it's
like
really
apps
not
giving
enough.
everybody a subscription to BetterHelp.
Yeah, the same thing. Yeah.
I would say, I guess my question with that is, do you find that humanitarian work and like ICRC then, I don't know how to word this nicely, but like attracts a certain type of person who can compartmentalize really well? Or do you find that it is, oh, it attracts people who care so much and then they get burnt out and leave, and then it's a new wave of people who care so much and then they burnt out and leave? And because I know like for my job, I definitely see a lot of that, like, you care so much, and then in 3 years you're like, I'm done, and then they peace out, and then you get a new wave of people. I just was curious if it was kind of the same way there.
I would say it differs between the forensic unit and the rest of ICRC, probably to varying degrees because it's a big organization. But I would say forensic, like the forensic unit in general, because I think forensic practitioners in general have to compartmentalize a lot better. And from like earlier in our careers, we made the decision to like see horrific images and like be okay with it. Like not everybody at ICRC is prepped like that. A lot of people in other units do join because like most of them have like either international law backgrounds or international relations, things like that, where they know a lot about global politics, they know a lot about the conflicts, they know a lot about the law, but they aren't necessarily conditioned to see the effects of war. And so like one of my friends, we were both associates at ICRC together at the same time. And she was in the resource mobilization unit. And so she worked on like grant writing and stuff. And then she was, so she worked there for a while, and then she was able to get a delegate position. And these are the entry-level mobile positions, for different things, but most people start as protection delegates, where they focus mostly on prisoners and missing persons. And so they do often work with forensic people, but there's a lot of contexts where we don't have forensic people, or we don't have enough forensic people. And so then these delegates who are not forensic practitioners get sent in to do forensic jobs because they think that they don't need us. And so they send people with backgrounds in like international relations to go do like a mass casualty recovery. And they like give them like the management of the dead handbook and like missing persons forms essentially, and are like, okay, go process this mass death scene. And so like that's going to cause a lot of trauma, I assume. That is very different than like a forensic practitioner who goes in and, if not has worked on a like a mass grave, has probably seen images of mass graves, and has probably done some type of mock something, even if they've never. Well, all our forensic specialists have to have a minimum of 6 to 8 years of casework. So they've all worked on this type of work. Many of the ones who work there have worked on mass casualty, mass graves from, honestly, a lot of them come out of like post Yugoslavia. A lot of them started their careers working there, or like Rwanda, like this early 90s start of where forensic humanitarian work really started to grow. So most people, not all of them, like now we're getting a wave like slightly older than me that hasn't had that experience, but still has done a lot of casework. But yeah, it's still different, completely different preparation than the rest of the organization.
So like, I guess when doing the forensic casework in the stance of being neutral, I know you're saying like more often it's just the identification purpose part of the forensic casework. So like for my job, we create the biological profile, but in that also have pathologies and traumas and things like that, which inherently are somewhat political in nature and can lend themselves to prosecution in a way. Does that part get done by someone else then? Or like, how does that work, I guess?
Yeah, so it depends on, say you're in a post-conflict zone, and you know you have a mass grave. You need to know before you go in what the purpose of excavating the mass grave is, and if you are trying to prosecute certain war crimes because of it. And so if you know the mass grave probably contains victims of like torture or mass execution, like the person from ICRC would not be able to essentially directly work on anything that will be used in court. And so they can be there and observe, and they can give advice, and then they can read the case reports, and they can maybe do their own analysis that is not shared with anybody except ICRC. But yeah, like anything that will go to court, they can't touch. And so other organizations would then take that on.
Going to what you're working on now with migration, I think that's what conflict causes in itself a huge humanitarian crisis. I think the two key areas you can look at are the Gaza Strip and Ukraine at the moment. But those two also have migration. Well, Gaza is sort of blocked off, but for the most part, you have migration as another key humanitarian disaster that is going on globally. Now, you work with migration through Europe, coming from Africa and East Asia, right? And
yeah, my project specifically will look at Tunisia and Malta as focus countries, and a bit in Central Mediterranean in general, so also Tunisia and Libya. But I am looking at also just policies that affect North African, predominantly, migration towards Europe, and how European policies and agreements with those North African countries are also affecting the migration flows, and lots of other things.
Yeah, I did some work a couple weeks with the Reuniting Families Project out of Baylor University, trying to identify migrants that were found along the Texas-Mexico border. And it's interesting, the process of just trying to identify, but it brings to light some of the questions of the problems that are faced among medical examiners' offices, coroners' offices, the death investigation system, and how I don't know what it's like within Europe, but here in the United States, there seems to be a real problem where, on the political side of things, there is this fight between either loosening border restrictions that allow for migration to come to increase, or we now have the Uber crackdown trying to stop migration all entirely. But what gets lost in it is that in those border states, the medical examiner's offices, that death investigation system, is all but broken because they cannot deal with the remains that are there. And in your experience, are you seeing something similar within Europe, particularly around those coastal states, that when it comes to those migrants? And I know part of the problem is, for instance, like with Spain and Italy, telling the boats, nope, you can just drown in the Mediterranean, we're not letting you in. Who deals with those remains?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start by saying that I think medical legal systems are just broken around the world. Because nowhere gets enough funding to actually hire the staff that they need. It's not prioritized enough because our like Western dominant culture doesn't like to acknowledge death. And so like they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to fund it, they don't like want to do anything about it. And then particularly when crises hit, whether that's war or natural disasters or migration accidents, other things like this, then nowhere knows how to deal with it. And not to mention like also ways that they fail in terms of like discrimination against different populations. And so this actually, I really had a realization that like the connection between my previous research on the missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis and my current research is that failure of medical legal systems, because these are both very different but very similar like case studies essentially of why our systems are failing. And so like specifically with like my research now and that crossing between North Africa and Europe, Europe is currently trying to, they focus a lot of their energy on pushbacks and criminalization and outsourcing, externalization of their borders, essentially, where they're now paying North African coast guards to push migrants back before they leave their waters and they're then in European territory. But then you see cases like Greece, for example, where they often shoot at boats because there's a legal gray area of like, you can shoot at like people who are like causing a threat and they don't know who's on the boat. And so they're invading the country, like this sort of rhetoric. But then you also get criminalization of like humanitarian aid workers who are trying to go out and rescue people. They often aren't allowed to, and they have to follow the rules, or then they get arrested, or their boats are seized, or both, or any mix of like these deterrent policies to try to get less people caring about migrants. I forget if I've answered all of your questions. I feel like I missed something.
I think you did, but do you think one of the policies that's starting to be put into place here is we are now going to start sending some of our migrants to Libya, to Rwanda?
Yeah, that's super illegal.
Have an impact. I know that's it's a legally gray area.
Not actually.
It's a legally black area, but the Supreme Court has said it's gray.
Gray according to the people in power, apparently.
Yeah.
But will that, and to be fair, we're not the ones who came up with the idea. The UK under, was it Boris Johnson or was it Cameron, said had a very similar policy. No, it wasn't. It was.
Are you talking
Rishi
about the
Sunak.
Rwanda one recently? Yeah,
it was Rishi Sunak who wanted to send migrants to Rwanda, and the United States is building off that same policy.
Mm-hmm.
And from someone who is studying migrants and migrant policy, is this going to be the new normal with states sending migrants not just to third countries, but to third continents?
Yeah, I mean, at a baseline, it's supposed to be very illegal to do that. But the gray area is this designation as a safe country.
Yeah.
And
whoever thought Rwanda was a safe country, maybe in 10, 15 years, but
yeah, and so it has to do with like whether it's supposed to be it has its designation as a safe country, and there's these certain parameters that like it needs to meet, but every place kind of makes up their own designation for which countries they consider safe. And also it's supposed to be the entire country that is safe. And so some people try to wiggle around it of like, oh, certain parts of the country are dangerous, and so we can just send them to a not as dangerous place. Which is interesting because there are discussions in Europe now about like whether the US can still be considered a safe country because people are so unsafe in different areas or for different reasons. Like it most likely won't go anywhere. But like they are talking about it, which is something. And it's because of this, you need to be safe. Everybody needs to be safe. Yeah.
I have a question kind of tangentially related, I guess, is I know like at AFS you had kind of talked about different like policies and laws that there are all of these like gray areas that people just keep pushing it on other people. Like that's not our problem. Like, to kind of like skirt around what's good to do, I guess, for a better way to put that. Do you find as like the anthropologist that you have almost like a sense of duty to be that voice of science communication in those spaces? Or do you find that like, at least specifically for like ICRC, that like the lawyers and stuff, like they get it and like it's fine? I don't know.
I mean, when it comes to any like actual science related, no, nobody gets it who's not a forensic practitioner or like a doctor or like something very closely related where they know what we're doing. Because at a baseline, nobody understands what we're doing, which I also find hilarious in the sense that, like, from like an AFS perspective, ICRC is so well regarded. I think for the forensic community in general around the world, like the ICRC forensic unit, like it is humanitarian forensics. It's not the only one, but like it is like the major one. But nobody at ICRC understands our work. And so we're constantly struggling to like tell them what we do. And so like there is like infighting between the Restoring Family Links unit that focuses more on like missing persons or people they either think or want to believe might be alive and missing. Because I also work with separation cases as well, where people are most likely alive, they just don't have the communication abilities to get in touch with their families, and so they can go to ICRC and reconnect through ICRC, and that's where they're really successful. But when it comes to like forensics and missing persons in a normal world is like forensic work. And at ICRC, it is focused on this, like they've had a central tracing agency since ICRC began, pretty much, because they were trying to, find missing persons after war, during war, recover body. Like they were doing the work, but they didn't know what they were doing. Like they did, but it's like it's very different because they didn't have any sort of a forensic unit until 2003. And it was after this Air National Missing Persons Conference. And so that's when forensics were really brought into ICRC. Before that, they often would bring in consultants who were forensic practitioners and would give advice. But like while many people understand the laws and the policies and how to talk to governments, when it comes to forensics, like they just don't understand our work. Like I heard that another like infighting thing, they were trying to argue that forensics doesn't have any data because they don't understand what we're doing. Because it like it like I love ICRC, but some things are like a mess.
Do you think that like lack of understanding is because there's no space to sit down and talk about it, or more so like I think, I don't know. I know for myself, I've seen not just within like my own job, but within grad schools and other things of like, well, if I can argue that your job's not necessary, then I get your funding type of.
Yes, actually, yes, because we are so horribly underfunded. And so like a lot of it does come from that because there are not resources. And so at the end of the day, it is people's jobs. And so like a lot of things, like there became a lot more of this when they were going through their financial crisis, which was around the time when I left. Somewhat related because they couldn't pay me. Like that was the whole reason my position ended, is because I was being funded. I was originally hired as an associate, but that was only for a year-ish contract. And then I was hired for a new position as a project officer, but specifically for the crisis in Ukraine when that started. But then that funding only extended to a certain point, and then there was nothing. And so when I was leaving, like one of my supervisors, Oren, who's also amazing, he now works in Ireland, but he was saying that, like, you know, essentially my role was so important, and that like they will really feel like the gap when I'm gone, but it's just like, we don't have money to pay you, so it's like, yeah, we're gonna feel it when you're gone, but we have no way to stop them. Like, and like, this is how a majority of like my friends, like, it's really hard to go from being an associate to like actually getting hired, because there's a bit of an experience gap for a lot of the positions. Forensics is the biggest though, because for an associate role, you have to have less than 2 years of experience, but for a entry forensic specialist, you have to have 6 to 8 years of casework experience. So it's like,
You have to
there's
go
a lofty gap
and
there.
you have to leave because ICRC doesn't do casework.
You have to leave.
I have to leave to get the experience. It's like, that's for a field position. Like I could still get hired back at headquarters for different projects or something if they ever got money. But for a field position, you need a lot more experience to actually be a specialist, because you are the ones that are giving advice to governments, essentially. So they want you to have that experience and know what you're doing before you go in. Yeah.
I would recommend the UN, but I think they're going to be running out of money soon too.
Oh yeah, the UN is in full crisis mode. There's so many jobs that are getting cut. And actually, this so one of my other side projects is I recently started volunteering with senior UN officials run for Secretary General. So his name is Bruno Donat, and he is running on a platform to essentially change things for the better in the UN and like kind of disrupt some of the usual things. So he's a bit controversial, but like in a good way. Like he actually wants to bring like real change, and he doesn't think he has an actual shot of being Secretary General because of how the internal politics of that position, how people get that position normally. But he wants to use this as a wider public platform to advocate for the like systemic flaws that he sees in the UN, or like one of his things is he wants to decolonize the UN because most of the high official positions are still held by European Western people. So he's Mauritian, and so he wants to bring this very tiny island country that's often forgot about. He wants to make the world know about Mauritius and like other populations around the world that are just like forgotten. Yeah, and so I really like what he wants to do, but it's so controversial, like within UN politics, because nobody is supposed to talk like that.
There's nothing controversial about UN politics. To understand UN politics, just remember this: everybody is either on the side of the Americans, the Russians, or the Chinese. That's it.
Yeah, and it's like I mean, me personally, I'm like so fed up with the Security Council. I don't understand
It's
why
useless.
I mean, I know why they created it the way they did, but like it's useless, and it was set up to essentially be useless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it needs reform, but that's off topic another day.
Yeah.
We'll
It is
drive
interesting though,
people
circling
away
back to
getting into global
neutrality.
politics.
Yeah. Circling back to neutrality quick though, one of Bruno's radical positions is that he doesn't really believe in neutrality, and he wants to focus more on impartiality. And it's because nobody is like truly neutral. And also he thinks that neutrality needs to have limits. Like once atrocities get past a certain point, like organizations need, like the UN specifically, needs to take a stance sooner and do something, and not just like stand by and watch. And so, and then focusing more on impartiality means that like you're still not discriminating in terms of like helping people and distributing aid and things like this, but yeah, but it's a tough balance, because then if you're not neutral, states don't want to work with you. So
Yeah. Well, Skylar, I want to thank you so much for being here. That was, I think, a very fascinating conversation. Stephanie and Jenna, thank you all so very much. So
thank you so much for having me,
real
Ashley.
quick,
It's a pleasure.
Can we post your email if anybody has any questions for you about the ICRC, or would you rather they come to us and we pass them along to you?
Yeah, sure. You can pass along my email. Anyone is also welcome to find me on LinkedIn and reach out there. Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much. And like I said, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to when we can meet again, because like I said to everyone, she's one of my great friends. I really enjoy Skylar.
So we could do a
I
part
enjoy you
two
too.
when you finish your dissertation, and you can just do like a casual part 2 defense to us that we won't give you any comments and we'll just say yay. But like I want to hear all the results.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like great dissertation prep. So I'll come back to you at some point.
Perfect.
That we're looking forward to. All right. Okay, so with that, I guess we'll say good night. Thank you to everyone. Have a great and pleasant evening.
See y'all next time on the Bone Club.
See ya.